The earth is my home. I promise to keep it healthy and beautiful. I will love the land, the air, the water, and all living creatures. I will be a defender of my planet, united with friends. I will save the earth.
My name is Commissioner Frank Avila. I'm a commissioner at the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District of Greater Chicago. And the title of our show today is Space to Grow, Transforming Chicago Schoolyards into Vibrant Outdoor Places. And as my guest, I have Daniella Pereira. She's the expert in forestry. Thank you for being on the show, Daniella.
Thank you very
And
much.
she's the Vice President of Community Conservation with Open Land.
Yes, with
Yeah.
Open Lands.
Yeah, Open Land. You know, that's a good name, Open Land.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's been around for 56 years, and we're always trying to, keep open space and connect people to nature.
Yeah. And now, Open Land, who are the partnerships and who are the main partners?
Yeah, so the Space to Grow program, it's managed by two entities, one being Open Lands and the other being a group called Healthy Schools Campaign. So we oversee the management and leverage our capital partners, which include MWRD, Metropolitan Water Reclamation District of Greater Chicago, Department of Water Management here in Chicago, and then, of course, Chicago Public Schools.
Yeah, and it's so important, Healthy School Campaign, because as our theme song is, kids are going to save the planet.
Yeah. Yeah, and Healthy Schools Campaign has been around for quite some time, and their whole focus is to make sure that the spaces in schools and around schools are healthy, and people are concerned about wellness, because a huge percentage of the students at Chicago Public Schools live in below poverty levels and don't really have access to a lot of green space or play spaces. And so it's been really important to make sure that we consider that when we're thinking about where to build some of these green schoolyards.
Yes, and how began the partnership begin?
It began in 2013. We both realized, both organizations, Healthy Schools Campaign and Open Lands, they were working really heavily on reinstating recess. So
reinstating recess?
I know, this is very shocking. The first time I heard this, I said, "Excuse me?"
Yeah.
But ultimately, recess was optional at Chicago Public Schools for decades.
Interesting.
And one of the things that they did is advocate very heavily to bring back recess, and which did happen. And then at some of the schools, they realized once the kids came outside that some kids didn't even know how to play. And so then they had to hire people to get in with the kids and teach them really how to play. But they were also concerned that when they did go outside for recess and play, that they didn't have options of places to play in.
Interesting.
It was broken asphalt parking lot area, either non-existent playground equipment or stuff that was pretty old. And so, that was their focus. In Open Lands, we had always started by connecting people with nature, but creating green spaces through the building school gardens. So the intention of getting some of the teachers in classrooms outside using those spaces around, ornamental or vegetable production to learn some math, to learn science, to do art, to actually touch the soil. And so that program was taking off, but it was pretty small compared to what we're doing now.
Yes.
And so the idea of combining both of our groups to really start thinking about how do we recreate and redesign these spaces on school campuses, and at the same time, how do you think about making sure that areas that have a lot of flooding, actually, is there a way to reduce flooding by capturing on site? And so with the consent decree from the EPA, it was mandated to make sure that you were capturing water on site.
Yeah.
And so it just felt like there was a lot of synergy between the capital partners and the managing partners to really explore this. And so the intention is, we started working together and came up with a whole plan to redesign these schoolyards.
That's excellent. I didn't realize that the healthy school campaign started out with recess because of health.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the many things that they worked on, but that was like one of the big ones that really took my breath away when I heard about it. Yeah.
And they got the STEM program, science, technology,
Engineering and math. Yep.
And now, and you mentioned art. And why is art so important? Your left brain and your right brain comes into focus there.
Yeah, definitely. I just think the more that we're going through life, and I actually think the world is kind of tough on students right now. I think there's a lot of stress on them to compete, to get good grades, to get into best schools. That I think art is an option of helping people loosen up, understand that there's other things other than just focusing so heavily on what you are really trained to do in school. And by being able to just change things. I know, like in my life, when I feel stressed out, I love, being downtown sometimes and just seeing the different musicians around, or seeing the beautiful murals all over, and it just pulls you out of your daily grind and realize that there's more to life than just what you have to do.
And as I mentioned, STEM, because my wife always pushes art.
Yes.
So now there's a program out there now. Besides STEM, they added an A.
Yes.
And it's STEAM now.
Yes.
Science, technology, engineering, art, and math.
Yes.
And that's why I'm glad that in your program you're including this art component.
Yeah. Definitely. Yeah, we don't add it to all of our schools intentionally, but what we do is we work heavily with the community to design the spaces. So, we don't come in and tell people what to do. We work with the school community, the principals, the teachers, the students, the parents, but then also the surrounding community, and they come in and tell us what they want. And parts of that have included things from murals to paintings and projects around some of the garden beds that are created too.
And so now, how many schools have benefit from Space to Grow?
Right.
And you said it started, when did it start?
2013.
2013, 5 years?
Yes. So far we've built 15 of these green schoolyards. We have 5 going in this summer, and by 2022 we will have 34 created.
34 created? Oh my
Yes.
God.
And hopefully that's just a start.
Yeah.
I think the intention of this is still, all 34 schools in a way are just a pilot to see how we could expand this to all schools, throughout the Chicago region.
Now, one question though, that when you plant the Space to Grow, you're not providing pesticides or herbicides. It's all organic type of Space to Grow.
Yes. So I actually don't know if Chicago Public Schools allows any pesticides. So that's a really good. I don't think they do.
Good,
and so we bring in and we partner with different people. Big Green is a group that brings in a lot of the garden beds. No pesticides are used in any of this.
Herbicides,
And no herbicides are used. I mean, we use natural things like compost. We use wood chips, to do for mulching. I think keeping things as clean and clear as possible is probably the way to go.
It's important because here you're teaching the kids how to start a garden.
Yes.
Using organic type of material, no pesticides, herbicide, and they bring that home to them, and they tell their parents, look, you shouldn't use this here also. You should do it this way.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same idea around recycling. Like if you could really teach and harness that energy in the kids and they go home and really teach their parents, I think that's just a fantastic way to push a really positive message.
And I'm glad that you, by the, how many schools now, you say?
We have 15 in the ground.
No, but you mentioned at the end of this year, or?
At the end of this year, we'll have 20 in the ground, and then 2022, 34.
34.
Mm-hmm.
And now, when are you going to go into the private schools too, or like the Catholic schools, if they?
You know, the way that the program was designed
Yeah.
was really unique in that, like, the capital partners that we're leveraging a lot of these dollars with are the ones that need to also, you know, be compliant in different ways. So, you know, Chicago Public Schools realizes that they need to update and improve some of their schoolyards and play equipment, whereas MWRD and the water department are like focused on making sure that water stays on site without taxing the combined sewers.
Yes.
So I guess if the private schools, you know, we do get a lot of requests from not only private schools, charter schools, but you know, schools outside of Chicago.
Sure.
And I think it just, I think we need to create a model that could be replicated in very different ways depending on the resources and people involved.
And I'm glad what you mentioned, create a model.
Oh, yes.
That a school could take if he's on the program. He could take, and maybe they want to do it on their own.
Yeah, yeah.
And maybe your assistance a little bit there.
Yeah,
and that's the key.
Yeah.
Have a model.
Yeah, and the thing is, so right now internationally, the city of Paris in France and in Rotterdam have signed agreements with our past Mayor Emmanuel to share best practices because they're starting to also build green schoolyards there. And so an exchange of information that way. But even nationally, there's a ton of different groups and organizations that are starting to do this. And the thing that makes it hard is that it's unique to the areas where it's in. Like in Chicago, especially with climate change, we're going to get more wet, we're going to have bigger storms. And so really thinking about how do you capture water when you are, you know, this group of neighborhoods that was built sort of on a swamp, you know? Whereas in California, their issues are with drought, you know, their issues are with fire, you know, and so thinking about the designs there are going to be very unique.
How to harvest that water.
Yes,
that's,
definitely.
Yeah, that's the key. Now, how are schools chosen to participate? Let's say all the schools from here in the city of Chicago is watching this show. Yeah. And say, I want to join this program.
Well, you are invited to apply. So not all schools are given the ability to apply. And so we look at a couple different things, different criteria. One is areas that are under-resourced. Schools that have either non-existent or very poor play equipment, neighborhoods that flood a lot, and sometimes areas that are park deficient. So we're looking at a combination of all of those pieces, and based off our time with our capital partners, we come up with a list of schools that we will invite to apply. Now it's up to them if they actually do apply or not. And so we had just gone through our process to invite new schools. They will not be chosen until a little bit later this year. But it's exciting because we're trying to also get into as many neighborhoods as possible, so it's not just concentrated in certain community areas, but that really we're looking at all those pieces and to be as diverse as possible.
Yeah, it's so important for the school to fill out this application.
Yes, it is. It is the first step in really having them understand what is going to be required.
Understand what is required.
Yes, and that's huge because one of the great pieces I think about the Space to Grow campus is after school and on weekends and in the evenings, it needs to be open as a neighborhood park. So that is one of the differences. Some CPS campuses in general can be closed, they lock it after school and no one uses it. But because these are going into neighborhoods that are park deficient, the intention is to keep it open. And that's not something that everyone's really excited about at first, thinking about that, but really it is a neighborhood resource and we want to keep it that way.
Now, what are some typical improvements made to schoolyards through Space to Grow?
So everything from, you know, the new play equipment that comes in, you know, really trying to think about the way that health educators are thinking about having students use like their full body in play. So we create anything from like these like little hills, places they can run around. We usually have running tracks in there. People sometimes choose soccer fields or basketball courts, but we do have sort of like a green lab or outdoor classroom space, so that teachers are invited to bring their students out there to utilize it for anything from science lab spaces to quiet spaces for reflection and reading to art. And those are just a couple of the ideas. You know, there's always usually a vegetable garden, a lot of ornamental spaces, trees, of course. And so it's really greening a lot of these spaces up and creating access to have fun outside.
So not only are you providing space for them to play around with, you mentioned vegetables also.
Yes.
So you have a little section showing them what to grow on the vegetable side?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Interesting.
So one of the things.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's good.
Well, in order to like harness kind of like this energy and really utilize that space, because we don't want to just have the space there and hope people use it. We really want to incorporate that the teachers are doing their lessons out there and that the kids feel comfortable. You know, one of the big things that we do ask is that we have the parents and community members form a garden group. So there is garden space on site. You know, it's mostly, you know, ornamental gardens, rain gardens, native gardens, but then the vegetable gardens too. And a lot of times school's not in session during the summer, and so who's going to maintain that? And so having that garden team really do that is super important to making sure that it stays sustainable in there as long as possible. We also have a wellness team.
A wellness team?
Yeah, and they're really focused on, you know, doing a lot of education for parents and the community about how to, you know, what different natural garden products you could use in your cooking, to thinking about happiness, or to, you know, different ideas about just staying well and fit, because a huge percentage in total at Chicago Public Schools, about 86% of the families that have their students there, their sons and daughters there, really are underserved populations. And there's a lot of health implications that affect people in underserved neighborhoods. And so it's really important to make sure that they're provided with access and space to clean, healthy living, that they have spaces to gather that they feel comfortable and safe in. And so that's one of the other ideas around the Space to Grow schools.
Interesting, because instead of going to supermarket that just cater to organic food, they say that's so expensive to buy organic food. They could grow it at the
right
school
there.
And then they learn, then they go home. If they have a little yard in the back of their house,
definitely.
they could grow that similar or other type of vegetables, organic vegetables,
Yes.
and not apply the herbicides or the pesticides, and they're staying healthy.
Definitely. Yeah, we try to think about these spaces as an anchor in the community, and some of the practices that we can include, partners can include around them, so that people then take it into their homes and their backyards too.
Yeah, that's excellent, excellent there. Now, do you have staff going out and showing these different type of gardens?
Oh yes, we do.
Because,
Thank goodness we have staff to do that.
I mean, that's the key. You need
yeah. So, you know, the planning process for this program starts, I'd say, 6 to 8 months ahead of them actually being constructed. So, you know, part of it is doing, you know, outreach and conversations with the principal and their teams, and then really going door to door and inviting the entire community to these design process where they're picking out what they want or showing us where flooding might happen in the neighborhood. And it's really, if we didn't have our staff to, engage them on this, I don't think we would have such a great program. And then after the schools are, or while the schools are being built, one of the things that one of our people at Open Lands has been really good about doing is how do you create a culture of nature at the schools?
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that all schools don't have that connection already, but if they don't, how do you start talking and working with teachers to maybe plant some small seeds in their classroom, talking with parents about how green space really affects in a positive way students with ADHD and helps them be calm and focused. And so giving those types of communications and resources hopefully will then provide a space that once the construction is done and they get to use that space, that it doesn't seem so foreign to them to get outside and actually start using it. And then within that first year after construction, there is, days we come out and plant with the students. There's days we come out and plant with the community so that there's ownership taken in those spaces. Where we have events where people are learning about healthy food and play. And then just for the community to realize that that space is theirs, and if they want to have a movie night outside, those are things that we could bring. And so we've been starting to work with Chicago Park District to do little exchanges, like if they could bring in some resources, some people who might come in and bring sports equipment or nature place-based stuff, and then vice versa, engage the people there to come to the local park district for other events that they might be having.
That's good. Now, is the program only for grammar school, or are you going to extend it to high school?
Right now, it's only grammar school.
Grammar school.
But I think it would be fantastic to do in high schools too.
Yes, I see a growing need for high school.
Just the connection to outdoor space, and I think that, sometimes teenagers are looked at like if they're loitering, that's something bad. It's like find spaces for people, teenagers to go and feel like they have space.
Yes, I have space there, especially you're having space for kids that are special needs.
Yes.
That they have some space to just relax.
Yes.
On there. That's excellent. I'm glad I met that person at that booth.
Yeah, good. I'm happy you did too.
Now, how do you decide? Well, you did mention how do you decide for improvement and amenities to include, because you involve the community. Yeah, you just don't go in and tell the community what to do. You have a meeting and they decide.
Yeah. I mean, of course, it would be so much easier to just go and do your design and walk away, right? Yeah. But I think that's, harnessing the energy in community is really important. I'm just going to tell you like a little story. So I grew up on the southwest side of Chicago.
Okay. And in the city of Chicago?
Oh, yeah. And not too far from Marquette Park. And I remember hanging out nightly in the summertime on our stoop, and how many neighbors were outside too. And so people always talk about, that there was air conditioning has changed that up. And so people, thinking about urban heat islands, and in the summertime when it gets really hot, asphalt, pavement, all these areas really hold heat, and so at night it really doesn't tend to cool off. So people stay in their house now that everyone has air conditioners. And so you kind of lose that community connection of knowing your neighbors a lot unless you have reasons to come together. And so I think, having these green spaces are ways of making that community cohesion of those connections that might not be as straightforward as they used to be when I was a little kid.
That's good, and I'm glad they have you in open space.
Oh, thank you.
Well, because as we talked before the show about your knowledge of the forest.
Yeah.
See, and as I mentioned, one of my friends, she does forest therapy.
Yeah.
Of the way the Japanese do forest therapy.
Forest bathing, yep.
Forest
bathing, yeah. That's how it started out, yeah.
Yeah. And then they could do a little garden bathing in what you're doing in the schools there.
Oh, yeah.
And it's not only for recess, it's for other things that they could do there.
I mean, there's just been so much research a lot of research even done in Chicago and looking at places like that have green space in areas that don't. They've looked at hospital beds that face, an area that might be like a brick wall or something without green space, and ones that have access to sea green outside. Those patients heal quicker.
Interesting.
They use less pain medication. And to me, like just those really basic things, like I think of humans, we have biophilia. So we are connected, we are part of nature, and actually touching it and looking at it really does affect, I think, our consciousness, our souls, our physical and mental health. And a lot of times, even if communities in Chicago have access to green space, it might not be a safe green space. And so how do you bring more eyes together? How do you bring more people together so that those spaces become controlled by the community and are deemed safe spaces?
I could see you're evolving on the open land and healthy school and the green spaces that when you're growing your herbs, when they start growing herbs, because vegetables, maybe they're going to herbs, and maybe having a cooking class.
Oh yeah.
On how to cook that herbs to make yourself healthy.
Yes.
I mean, this is going to take time.
Oh yeah.
But I could see what you're doing be growing into other aspects.
Yeah, and I think the idea of a lot of times, I'm just thinking about Mayor Lightfoot. Like her intention is really to bring resources into communities, and so thinking about like how do you start mobilizing these really positive things that are happening already and have that leadership within the community themselves to like start really growing
and
that.
it probably won't involve much money. And you probably save money because once you start cooking what you're growing, you're going to stay healthy.
Yes.
See? And they don't have this health bills that
definitely. And there are so many great organizations that are community-based organizations who are doing that already. And so it's just like connecting people to those resources is super important.
Well, I could see your group growing.
Yeah.
If right now you have 2 organizations.
Yeah.
So as you said, a wellness coming into being, a cooking class coming into being. So it's going to spread. And also, I'm glad that I hope that you're going to have a model that the whole world could use, even though you mentioned that we're in the Midwest, that we have a different type of climate. And another part in India, they have a different kind of climate.
Definitely.
But they could use that as a model and just tweak it a little bit for their area. That's probably in your thoughts too down the line.
Yeah, I mean, like you just look historically, when probably a generation ago, there were green schoolyards. There was just a lot more green space, and at this point, it's how do you then? Do we just keep talking? And it's just changing a lot.